Madam Speaker, I rise to request a point of personal privilege.
Delegate LaRock, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, like the delegate from Bedford, I also received a postcard recently, a different one.
I'm in.
It has a color artistic rendering of George Floyd. His name is written in large, bold, red type next to his picture. It gives the place he lived and acknowledges that he died on May 25th, 2020 at age 46. I don't need to go through the details of the George Floyd tragedy. We've all heard them to a great extent. And to some degree, that's why we're meeting and focusing on many of the initiatives that have been brought forward in this special session. The back of the postcard sends the message to me as a delegate saying qualified immunity has got to go. It protects the bad cops who are destroying our communities. Well, there's been much discussion on whether or not qualified immunity is a good thing. I think I've come down on the side opposing that pretty clearly. But I think we can all agree that bad cops cause significant damage not only to our communities, but they are a huge detriment to other members of law enforcement who are good cops, the majority who are good cops. Every few decades, Madam Speaker, members of the body, an event comes along and it stirs our nation deeply in our emotions. It can affect us and our children for decades. I think that the recent death of George Floyd has put a lot of things in motion. It is one of those events. Some of the things that it's put in motion are very good and some not so good. Perhaps our greatest responsibility as legislators is to thoughtfully assess what, if any, changes to our laws may help avoid future tragedies in years ahead. I know that thought was on my mind as we approached the special session and caused me to look for ways that I could improve things through legislation. Madam Speaker, members of the body, we all know that we have a new law coming on the books relating to collective bargaining agreements that will be negotiated between local governments and police associations or police unions. Collective bargaining can help secure benefits and compensation for hardworking people. But collective bargaining can and most definitely does make it very difficult or even impossible to hold bad cops accountable. So from where I view this, there could not be a more obvious way to improve how law enforcement accountability is conducted than to avoid procedures which are widely known to impose barriers to investigations and discipline in situations involving law enforcement misconduct. That's what some collective bargaining agreement or some of the terms in those agreements actually do. Stated a little differently, allowing local governments to pass union or union association agreements which hinder investigations and soften or eliminate appropriate discipline all but guarantee that there will be more victims in Virginia coming soon. Incidents such as the death of George Floyd could have been avoided if collective bargaining agreements did not block proper police accountability. Again, Madam Speaker, these collective bargaining agreements can be a significant barrier to basic accountability. A review of police contracts in 81 of the nation's largest cities demonstrated a number of ways accountability over police actions was thwarted. 50 cities restrict interrogations by limiting how long an officer can be interrogated, who can interrogate him or her, and the types of questions that can be asked, and when the interrogation can take place, sometimes delaying interrogations for up to 30 days. Madam Speaker, members of the body, 41 cities give officers under investigation access to information that civilians would not get. 64 cities limit disciplinary consequences for officers, including preventing an officer's history of past misconduct from being considered in future cases. 43 cities erase records of misconduct, in some cases in as little as 6 months. Perhaps the worst of all, 48 cities let officers appeal disciplinary decisions to an arbitrator who can reinstate the officer. Madam Speaker, the United States Conference of Mayors recently released a report. We don't have to go looking for information on how these collective bargaining agreements affect law enforcement. They stated in this study titled Report on Police Reform and Racial Justice. Again, these are mayors throughout the United States, probably not the most liberal group of individuals in government. They state CBAs, for collective bargaining agreements, are a significant barrier to basic accountability. The report points out, and I'm quoting it, over the years, police contracts, union CBAs, have evolved into much more than standard labor contracts. Many have grown to include substantial barriers to basic accountability. CBAs often contain provisions that go far beyond what is necessary to protect those rights. Some provisions look innocuous on their face, but they can severely impair a department's legitimate need to investigate allegations of a police officer's misconduct or to hold officers accountable. Without legislation to prevent the new law that comes into effect in Virginia in 2021, unions will negotiate agreements with local governments, and some of these provisions will protect bad cops, period. What are some of these people who come out ahead if we don't correct this law by adjusting the law that pertains to collective bargaining agreements? I'll cite just a couple of very, very shocking examples. Jason Van Dyke, the Chicago Police Department, who in 2014 killed 17-year-old Laquan McDonald by shooting him in the back as he was walking away at the time. Van Dyke had been the subject of 20 complaints, 10 of which alleged excessive force. Hector Jimenez, Oakland Police Department in California, killed an unarmed man, shooting him 3 times in the back as he ran away, just 7 months after Jimenez had shot and killed an unarmed 20-year-old. Despite killing 2 unarmed men and costing taxpayers $650,000 in a settlement to one of the dead men's families, he was reinstated and given back pay. Going back to George Floyd, Madam Speaker, on May 25th, 46-year-old African-American man killed in Minneapolis while being arrested allegedly for using a counterfeit bill. Derek Chauvin knelt on George Floyd's neck for several minutes. According to the New York Times, in nearly 2 decades with the Minneapolis Police Department, Derek Chauvin faced at least 17 misconduct complaints, none of which derailed his career. Even as outrage has mounted over the deaths at the hands of police, it remains notoriously difficult in the United States to hold police officers accountable, in part because of the political clout of unions. That's the end of the quote from the New York Times. Madam Speaker, thank you for indulging me for this long point of personal privilege, but I can't help but want to at least get the message to this body that we can avoid some of the barriers to law enforcement accountability experienced elsewhere in the nation by limiting the scope of police union collective bargaining agreements. I have introduced House Bill 5071, called the Law Enforcement Transparency and Accountability Act. In this special session, it does not block collective bargaining with police associations or unions, but it would limit insert provisions that would limit what provisions could be contained in those collective bargaining agreements. I will close, Madam Speaker, members of the Assembly, by saying the General Assembly's opportunity, it is a special session. We are here, we have an opportunity to limit the scope of a public safety officer collective bargaining compensation and benefits. We don't want to affect the part of a collective bargaining agreement that affect the normal benefits and compensation. But if we don't correct this problem as it relates to how accountability is administered, we're tying the hands of the chiefs of police and other people who are charged with maintaining order and making sure that police who misbehave or conduct themselves improperly can be taken, reprimanded, held accountable, fired, terminated, and perhaps even not be reinstated if that's the appropriate action. So, Madam Speaker, I thank you for indulging me. House Bill 5071 is still alive, technically, and if anybody is interested in taking a second look, I think it would accomplish a lot toward what we need to accomplish as a General Assembly to make people safer in this Commonwealth. Thank you.
Thank you.